All right, so the Wednesday, October 5th meeting of the Rockport School Committee is now in session. Tonight will be our second meeting being broadcast from the Rockport Public Library, thanks to our friends at Studio 1623, and it will be recorded. First item is approval of minutes from September 21st. All of us were here at that meeting. Are there any changes, amendments, clarifications anyone wants? No? So do we have a motion to approve the minutes as presented?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Public comment. We don't have an audience tonight, so there is no public comments. We'll move on to correspondence and personnel issues. We don't have any of those. It's still early in the school year, so we'll make that back up during budgeting season. Share the success. That means that our Student Advisory Committee rep, Josh Farrell, is up next.
That would be me. Oh, geez. All right, so at Rockport High School, the teachers had a professional development last week where they collaborated to learn about equity and inclusion across all three school levels. We hosted our annual open house on Thursday night last week. We had musicians play at the weekly assembly on Tuesday. A lot of chamber kids stepped up, even though their songs weren't all the way ready to perform, to provide that opportunity. In the 7th grade, they had field trips to the Salt Marsh, Hammond Castle, and a snake safari, so they were very busy. I wish I was in 7th grade. The 8th graders were excited to learn about their trip to Washington, D.C. that you guys approved, so they say thank you for that. And at the elementary school, they had their first community meeting led by the 5th graders, and they had NHS high school members come and participate and present for them, and they had an open house that was a huge success for all the parents involved.
Great. Thanks, Josh. Next up, Policies Subcommittee. I think we have an update on something.
Yep. All right, so we did meet last week, the subcommittee, to begin some of the reviews of the policies. And kind of continuing from that last year, one of the things I've been noticing as first time as doing the policy review is that some of these policies are very dated. And going through those policies, they also reference the legal references, mass law, even some of them federal law. Dr. Branco talked about a mask policy review that's available from Mask. So a couple things about that I wanted to mention, and then I think it would be worth having a discussion about. Mask would update according to the current laws and regulations and in line with current practices. And they would also talk about what policies would be optional and what policies could still remain Rockport specific. Because I know that's one of the concerns, is losing some of the Rockport specific policies if Mask was involved in the process. And the way that it works, and you can jump in anytime, but it's my understanding that Mask would take their policy manual and the Rockport policy manual, compare the two, and then the subcommittee would still work with Mask to update. But what they're offering is really a expert in that and updated laws and regulations. So I think it's worth having a discussion about whether this is something we'd want to entertain, because going through some of the policies, for instance, one of those policies in the manual is a Corey policy, important policy to have. It's dated from 2003. Mm-hmm. So if I begin the update on that, I don't know the current laws and regulations about Corey, and so I don't feel comfortable making those decisions myself. Obviously, we bring it to the full committee, but it still feels like a really important issue to be leaving to, I'll call myself a layman with it. So not an expert in the policy. So that's one example, the Corey from 2003. There's another one, the Employee Acceptable Use of Information Resources, GBEE. It's from 2012, but it references federal and state law, which again is above my head. But another one that I think is, in today's time, is a really important policy to have nailed down right. There's another update for mask right now. So going into the Rockport policy manual, it's not even in our policy manual, and which scares me because it's also an important policy to have. So I just wonder if it's feasible to do this, to have the mask policy review. So there's if you want to talk about the process.
Yeah,
and
so
about how
Mr.
that
Chair,
works.
I'd reach out to Dorothy Presser, who is one of their lead field reps, and I've had experience with Ms. Presser doing this work in other places. So the way she talked us through it was they would come in and they would basically go at our pace, and in a district our size, she thinks it can be done in 1 year. And they would go section by section, and we have different options where they could do the compare and contrast without us in the room, and then come to subcommittee, which might be the path of least resistance for us, so that we're not out booking extra meetings and watching them do the work. So that's the one I would recommend, and then they would come back, the subcommittee would go through everything and kind of have that give and take between the Rockport policies and the mask policies, and then it would come to the full committee for discussion, review, first, second read, just like they always do, and it would just be chunked in larger segments. Once that's done, if that takes place in 1 year, that gives us a fully updated policy. Everything's hyperlinked, everything's up to date. Then when Mask comes out with a new version or updated version, because we're paying into the program, we just get the update. Again, you do a first and second read as a committee, and it's there. It allows districts, and this is true for every district, so I'm not sure why not every district is taking advantage of this right now, but it allows districts, because every 3 years your committee could roll over. You know, you don't have a policy expert in the room all the time. So some years you have someone who they love this stuff and they're really good at it, and 3 years later that person's gone and someone comes in and that's not their lean. So I do heavily recommend it. They do have a payment option that we will discuss, that we'll look at. The budget can handle the payment option. On the slide, you'll see this second version called Policy 21. So the next level that they offer is that they actually house your policy book. So that's an additional thing that we would talk about after year one. So another conversation would be after you get this done, then on your website, they hyperlink out to theirs, and then everything is live, everything is paginated, everything is word searchable. It's fascinating. About 100 to 105 districts statewide are taking advantage of this out of the 220 districts in the state. So it is a growing necessity across the state, and a lot of school committees are feeling this push to say, listen, we understand we're responsible for it, but we need some pros to help us do the lift.
Are there any downsides?
None that I've seen. I mean, I'll tell you, as the boots on the ground person, like, there's nothing worse than being trapped in a situation where you're trapped between practice and policy. And so that actually professionally scares me. Not necessarily here in Rockport, but just generally speaking, when you go to do something, whether it's personnel or students or anything in between, and you have a policy that's outdated, and now you have to call an attorney to find out if it's good or bad, that is a tough way to do business. So I just think it's timely to do the overhaul with a new leadership team, and we're having those conversations now as we look at the handbook. We've already talked about trying to go with a condensed handbook in the future. So our handbooks would actually hyperlink to the policy book, and then we wouldn't have any missed language, we wouldn't have any redundancies that are poorly put together.
Questions?
So it sounds like the cost could even be offset by not referring to attorneys as frequently.
Yeah,
or something like that.
theoretically,
I mean,
yeah,
I always
theoretically.
think about attorneys, you
Yeah.
know, expensive.
Yeah.
And when you really look at some of the policy language, some of the language, and they reference, as I said, federal and state law.
Yeah.
So if those aren't up to date, and what are we exposing ourselves to?
Right.
So if you think about a worst case scenario, the cost of this to me is no question worth it for a worst case scenario type of event.
Right. Well, it doesn't seem unreasonable. I mean, to my mind, it's been at least 13 years, and I don't think it's been 13 years. I don't think we've ever done this since there's been a comprehensive look at the book. I know we've had the benefit of really earnest and hardworking school committee members, usually in their first and second year, coming in, and they're always finding items that are either duplicative of other policies or out of date. But I think there's a tremendous amount of value in actually having a pair of eyes that's bigger than just those in Rockport take a look at it. I think, Mark, our experience when we went on the superintendent search to find Dr. Bronco was going outside of our district and having an authority come in who at least had a view of what the 351 cities and towns were doing in their own right to look at things, gave us best practices that I think really benefited our superintendent search. And I would imagine, although some people's eyes glaze over at policy, that having a team come in that's very familiar with this and getting us all on the same page for a baseline for the first time in at least a decade, it's got a lot of value to it, not the least of which is it allows us to start at a common understanding of where we are with these policies. I think we saw in the COVID couple of years that trying to rewrite some of those policies revealed that we didn't have necessarily an understanding of the legal requirements beyond what Mask was sharing with us anyway in updates. But that didn't mean that we were missing things that hadn't been updated in a long time. So I see a lot of value in this as well.
And I don't want to minimize, I know Colleen's not with us tonight, but I don't want to minimize the work, particularly that someone who's done this, I think, more than a couple years now has done. That's typical in a lot of school districts where there are people doing yeoman's work who stay on that committee, try to press it forward. So I don't want to minimize the efforts that have been made historically on that work. I just think it's a daunting task, as you said, to put that forward. And since it's been over 10 plus years, it makes sense to do it. And again, we've got 50 or 60% of the leadership team is brand new. So this would help us calibrate our baseline as well.
Well, I think the other piece was the care, feeding, and hosting of the site at a location that we're not supporting, but we can reference. I mean, that's been an issue even for members of the public who try and look up a policy, and in the past, oh, that's the old one, or we haven't updated that link. I really like the idea of having a maintained site that's up to date. Mark, you were going to say something?
I was going to add that this is not getting rid of the policy subcommittee in any way, because that policy subcommittee is still going to be meeting with that expert from Mask, going through the policies and keeping Rockport specific language as we need, and still deciding whether that policy language wants to be changed or not changed and updated to reflect what we need in Rockport. So it's not getting rid of that committee. And in fact, it probably is going to be more work for the first year as you go through and update everything, or 2 years, whatever it takes. So
Yep.
it's but I think it would be worthwhile.
Well, and it sounds like it maintains what's unique about Rockport in the positive sense without also retaining things about Rockport that may not be helpful, meaning policies that are out of date or referencing the wrong legal statute, et cetera. So it sounds like it's the best of both worlds. It's up to date, but it's tailor-made to our needs as a small town.
And I think much of what is policy are things that really shouldn't be unique, maybe can't be unique. They really, maybe there are a few things, the way that we do things, the way that we, I know there's been a few policies like that, but it does, like when you're talking about the Corey policy, when you're policies like that really, need to be very standardized. And I don't think it minimizes the work that Colleen's done over many years, that Mark's done, that Rick Dross did when he was here, because Mask is also constantly coming out with updates and new policies. So then you're trying to focus on those, and then there's all these other policies that haven't been updated in however many years. So it's a kind of an impossible task for a two-person committee to.
Yeah, and the other thing you'll notice as we go through this work is the differentiation between policy and procedure. And oftentimes when those of us who are lay people who aren't policy professionals get into the weeds of writing policy, practices and procedures slide into those documents. And then as someone who's implementing that becomes tricky because, the practice and implementation needs to be done by the pros. So sometimes you'll see Mask come in and just kind of vet some of that language out too, in a safe way.
And maybe that's more of the uniqueness in like the procedure and the way that it's implemented
Right.
might be different, but the actual policy, which comes from the law, is. And I really like the idea of the policy being linked to the handbook. Probably makes it easier for administrators, makes it easy for parents, families, so I think that's great.
And that's something over the years, to complement someone who isn't here, Colleen in her professional life is heavily involved in crafting policy and would often keep us honest about the difference between policy and procedure. And it's easy to get confused. And certainly Colleen, as long as she's been here, hasn't been able to completely overhaul the entire policy manual. So it sounds like we're in consensus that this is something that we think is desirable. Mark has reassured us that it's something that fits within the budget. So I guess what I'd look for now is there if there's no other discussion, is there a motion to approve authorizing the superintendent to pursue starting the review of the policy manual with the Friends from Mask?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great. That'll be interesting to see what the policy subcommittee comes back with too, in terms of the experience. I
Yeah.
assume it's gonna be a pretty positive one.
I agree.
Great use of resources. I mean, it's there, use it.
Yeah. All right, so the entry plan update.
So this one will be quick. I just like to give you this every 2 weeks to make sure, you know that I'm still doing what I'm supposed to be doing. So the survey was sent out, as you know, about a month or so ago. We're up to about 130 responses that I think climbed a little bit more today. So we're getting there. I'd love to see a couple hundred come in. But I think they're trickling in slowly. We keep pushing it out through the principals' newsletters every week, and then I just sent my monthly newsletter out, and right after I sent mine out, it looked like it went up by about 10, so I do think people are responding. We just sent out this week one-on-one interview invitations, which all of you should have also received. So they're to about 25 to 30 targeted stakeholders, including employees at Town Hall, members of the Board of Selectmen, FinCom, School Committee, the two chiefs, Senator Tarr, Rep. Ferrante, and others. So those invites are out. And Ms. Ogier is very happy to be booking all those appointments for me over the next 3 or 4 weeks as furiously as possible. And I'm going to continue to do the data review with the leadership team and the document review. That's sort of never ending and iterative as we go through the school year anyway. And then what's in process now is I'm wrapping my head around this next step after the one-on-one interviews around focus groups. So focus groups with students, focus groups with staff, focus groups with community members. I'm toying with trying to get a couple local sponsors or businesses maybe to host it as a superintendent's coffee or something like that in a casual setting and some formal settings in the office as well. So between now and the holiday break in December, you'll see the one-on-ones taking place, and I'll update you on that work, and then ultimately have the small stakeholder groups come together as well. So great feedback. So people are not shy in Rockport. So people are sharing regularly, and I'm getting emails as well that I've read all of so far, and I'm still responding to some people who either didn't take the survey or took it but still wanted to get more information to me. So I suspect that when all of the data gathering piece is done, I'm going to have a lot of information to sift through and have the leadership team process. So thank you to the community for being open to all of this. Our friends at Rockport Music also invited me yesterday for a fantastic meeting. So I got a tour of the Shailene Lou and of their facility across the street where the offices are. And we spent a long time talking about the educational commitment that organization has made to our school district and to the greater Rockport community. So thank you to that organization for inviting me into your doors. And it was a great session, and I was excited. The musician in me was excited to stand on that stage, quite honestly. So it was pretty cool. Any questions about the entry plan work right now?
So Mark, the 30 targeted stakeholders for one-on-one interviews,
Yep.
what's the time frame for that? Because that could be a difficult group to...
Hour and 15 minutes. So if you're asking for the micro, there's your micro. The macro is, I think we said by Thanksgiving. So by the Friday before the Thanksgiving break is the hope. So that's, it'll be fast and furious. But yeah, the more I can pack in, I think I'd appreciate the time to analyze the data. So that the faster I get it in, the easier that'll be. And I think people have already reached out, so I think we should be in good shape getting people. And the people who have communicated have been really receptive to the fact that we're asking for opinions too, which is kind of nice to hear that they're excited to share and ready to participate.
Excellent. Questions or? Okay, so the Mass Lead for Literacy Grant Institute.
So excited to tell you, because the small towns don't always get the competitive grants, right? So First of all, thank you to the leadership team. June and Martha have been co-chairing the organizational structure this year for us around the grants, so that it's much more systemically based, and we have one repository and one clear understanding for the leadership team of all the work we're doing and how we're doing it. And it's made applying for grants a little more streamlined, and it's allowed people to be a little compartmentalized as we get them, but then come back together as a leadership team to discuss them. So DESC put out this Massachusetts Lead for Literacy Institute grant, which is actually targeting small districts, school districts that have 3 elementary schools or less, who are looking to make moves from an early literacy standpoint, which this district has targeted previously and has recommitted themselves to this year. Also, there's a connection to MTSS, multi-tiered system of supports, and how we're meeting the needs of all students across the learning spectrums. And so you had to have met certain thresholds and categories for your current district, and we did meet them all. Jody Goodhue, I believe, authored the grant after the principals came together and had a conversation about it. We received acceptance emails maybe a week and a half ago, am I right? Or so, right? That we've heard from DESC, so we were very, very pleasantly surprised to be awarded the grant. So this grant will allow us to pay a small team of teachers stipends to do some really good steering committee work. So there'll be 2 administrators from the elementary school, a small team of teachers. They'll come together, the schedule's right there and in your drive as well. They'll come together for focus sessions. And the intended outcome here is that we will develop a K-5 literacy plan for the district that's going to be very prescriptively driven, so all of the stakeholders and all of the school districts represented will be working on these together. Each school district will come out with its own unique literacy plan, but they'll have some foundational components in them that the state is looking for. That will then inform our curriculum review and adoption work. So as we start to talk about what our foundational resources should and shouldn't be at the elementary level from a literacy standpoint, this is the first step. So we don't want to jump into curriculum review and adoption until we've really philosophized our work and calibrated our knowledge base around this. So that's what this will allow us to do at the elementary level. And then, is that better? And then we'll move up to the 6th through 8th grade the following year, and then the 9th through 12th after that. So in a lot of content areas, when you do curriculum work, you do backwards by design. So you do this, what we want students to know and are able to do at the end. So what do we want our high flyers to know and be able to do at the math level, the science level? But when you talk about literacy, it's exactly the opposite. You build it from the ground up. You build those early literacy skills and programming, and then you scaffold up. So this is a great opportunity. So thank you to those in the district who applied for it. Thank you to the teachers who stepped up, who will be part of the steering committee and the planning team. And I look forward to bringing those members back here to give us an update over the course of the next couple months to let us know how the work is going.
It's exciting. Excellent. And then following that, we have the Mass State Seal of Biliteracy.
So this is an initiative that came out of the state quite a few years back. This is a credential that graduating seniors can earn. It can go on their diploma and can be used as a resume credential when they're applying to colleges and universities. And it basically recognizes high school graduates who attain high functional and academic levels of proficiency in English and one other world language. Originally came out of a lot of the work around L students, our English learners, and what they wanted to do is recognize that population originally who were coming in not as native speakers, and for all of the hard work and attainment that they would get when they finally had mastered the English language. And then we realized as a state that all of the native speakers theoretically could do the reverse by taking Spanish or French or German or Mandarin or whatever they're offered in their local high schools. So this is a broad category for Seal of Biliteracy. There is an academic testing component. The English version is connected to the Mcas proficiency in advanced in ELA in 10th grade. And then the content area language, there's a Seal of Biliteracy content exam that students will take through their world language program. So I thank you to Drea Bush. She's our English language learner teacher who came to Principal Rose to ask if this was something we'd be involved in. And we quickly greenlighted that. It's a great opportunity for our district and our kids. And thank you to the World Language Department who will do some of the heavy lifting along with Drea. And we anticipate being able to award current seniors with this if we get moving. So that's the hope. Any questions or thoughts on that work?
I think it's a really great idea. And I know that we probably have within the school district itself, there are probably more students than maybe the general public is aware of who would qualify for this, are either coming in as non-native speakers or,
Yep.
that's great.
Yep.
Questions?
And sometimes initiatives like this spark that next group of students to stay in, year 4 or year 5 or honors or AP of a world language, where some students might not hang in with those either. So sometimes if there's a little bit of another incentive
Right.
to stick that language out for the 4th year or challenge yourself at the upper level, it's absolutely worth that.
So you may be too new to Rockport to know the answer to this question, but just because we've had the Lead for Literacy grant and then the State Seal of Biliteracy, is there a mechanism for shepherding, all the different sorts of grants and potential support mechanisms in, or is it often, obviously the biliteracy, we had some champions in there
Right.
bringing it to the attention of the administration and getting it supported.
So right now, a lot of that information comes either through principals, local roundtables, or through superintendent roundtables, where DESE will come out and visit. So that the Office of Curriculum Instruction or Office of Teaching and Learning will come out, send reps out, send emails out, send notices out. So we've just had conversations as a leadership team about making sure that when that information comes in, whoever catches it, so to speak, emails me and says, hey, can we get this on next week's agenda? So when we come together every other week as a leadership team, we make sure that we're sharing all that information. That's how this happened. I think it came across 2 of our desks, and then Jody saw it as well. We all kind of threw it out there through an email. We had a meeting to talk about it, and then they sort of
Right.
ran. So right now, we have enough eyes on everything that's coming out of DESE I think, to capture it all.
Because I know over the years, and it'll be interesting to see if you get this feedback through some of your stakeholder interviews, we've often had a discussion about, in terms of support for grant writing, we've often had, we could get more grants if we had someone who was actually dedicated to this task or part-time dedicated. So it'll be, dependent on who is presenting it
Right.
as to the relative importance that they gave it, but it'll be interesting to see if you get some feedback along those lines and what you think of it.
Yeah, I've yet to see, unless you're in a really large district or a large
Right.
city district, I've yet to see that financial payoff. I'm sure it does exist somewhere in a larger district, but right now, especially because of the size of our district, it's difficult to chase those competitive grants when they put so many parameters around them. So so right now, I'm excited to get the one. I'm sure there'll be 2 or 3 others that over the next year or so we'll probably qualify for. And DESE does look fondly on districts who jump in on initiatives early. So if once you're in the pipeline, my experience has been, okay, now you're one of the early literacy adopters who's already partnered with them. So sometimes they'll come out with a second round of grants that one of the categories will say, if you were in the first round or if you were an early adopter. So, there's always a benefit to saying yes early. My experience, I've done that with computer science grants and with social studies grants in the past. So my hope is that you get some kind of recognition down the future for saying yes.
Great. MCAS preliminary results update.
So super preliminary, right? This is not the MCAS presentation tonight. I just want to put that out there right now so you don't have your expectations up or down for this next conversation. So I just wanted to give you the commercial because a lot of the information is out and parent reports are coming out to the schools tomorrow. So the release timeline is on here just in case you haven't seen any of this or heard of any of this. So the embargoed official results were made available to us in late September. Then the accountability data came out the next day. We were on a statewide phone call to discuss the embargoed state results so that we could kind of get the state's big picture overview. And then the commissioner held his press call and shared the embargoed data with the press on the 28th. The public release was lifted at noon on the 29th, and that's when everything went public from at least the state level data. And then the electronic parent guardian reports came to us digitally in our Dropbox accounts with the state so that we could get quick looks at individual data. And then tomorrow, it looks like paper copies of the parent guardian reports will come to districts. So in a just stroke of genius timing, we have our leadership team meeting tomorrow. They hit every other week on Thursdays. So this is one of our agenda items. So we'll talk about how we're rolling out, sending all of the parent reports home. And then a week from now, a week from now, we have our first, I mentioned the secondary curriculum council and the elementary curriculum councils that we're trying to pull together. So the curriculum leadership teams are going to have conversations around data analysis. So the leadership team is currently pulling all our data together in one shared resource digitally, so all teachers will have access to all of the results digitally. And then we're going to implement an Mcas analysis protocol that all teams of teachers will do to take a look at this work. So all of that will happen over the next month or so. Just so that we all are on the same page and remember what we just survived the past 2.5 years. 2022 was the first full Mcas administration for kids 3 through 8 since 2019, and our 10th graders hadn't taken the test in 2 years. So there was a lot of reacclimation to standardized testing that had to take place. And even in 21, it was only a half test administered to the elementary and the middle school kids. And then these are some really high-end summary notes that I grabbed from DESE off of our conference calls. They want us to, maintain our awareness that these will show mixed results compared to the 21 results because of the uniqueness of the 21 tests. Strangely enough, the math scores increased. I don't want to try to speak in an educated manner about that yet until I learn more. At first blush, the argument a lot of my peers and I are making is it's easier to learn some mathematical concepts in a hybrid or online format than it might be literacy concepts. I don't know if there's a lot of science behind that, but anecdotally that's what many educators are believing at this point in time. And then we clearly have seen the ELA and literacy scores decline across the state. Again, strangely enough, the science scores increased a little bit from 21 as well, so we're curious what that data looks like. And there's always a silver lining to everything we go through, and so I always try to look at the COVID experience and say, what did we learn about it, education in general, and can we look at the positives? And maybe one of the positives is we'll learn that there are certain subject areas that can be taught K-12 or 5-12 using more hybrid or digital access points and in a positive way than other subjects. And it's not a conversation I've ever been engaged in previously. When we compare the results to pre-pandemic levels, it's pretty clear that we already have a long way to go for recovery. Two major components across the state were that the ELA focus areas need to be looked at for impact of lower writing scores and early literacy challenges. We can't forget that our pre-K, K, and 1 kids, some of them hadn't even been in school, literally been in a real school for a year or two, and then suddenly were thrown into a test situation in 3rd grade. So that's a tough ask of those kids. And student absenteeism still remains a really big challenge across the board. So we see it now starting to slow down and subside, but for those 2.5 years, it was a legit challenge to have students out, to have teachers out, to have chunks of human beings out in general at the same time. So as we analyze our results, the state is asking districts to just keep track and keep things in mind. The past 2.5 years haven't been normal, so the results are going to look different than they have in the past. Be aware of the struggles we've had with absenteeism and flexible learning models, and as a result, students' access to instruction was severely interrupted in many cases. We will dig into the data. We'll look heavily at the student growth percentile. You'll hear me talk more about that in a couple of weeks. Student growth is one of the few things or best parts of the Mcas that I believe are in existence right now, that we can compare apples to apples. We can really look at the impact we're having on kids by name and cohorts and profiles of kids. So we'll lean into the student growth percentile a little bit heavier, try to look for some bright spots, and then discuss the areas of growth that Rockport has. This will set, good or bad, a new baseline for us moving forward, as it will for every district in the state. We now have, good or bad, one snapshot in time to look at, and so we'll lean on that. We'll talk about where recovery has started in Rockport, and we'll try to connect all of this data to our ongoing initiatives around teaching and learning. And so you'll hear me talk about the culture of progress monitoring a lot in the next couple of weeks when we come back together, and just so that everybody understands my belief systems and philosophies around Mcas. I'm not anti-standardized testing. I'm anti-one test, and I'm anti-high stakes to a certain extent. But I do heavily believe in the importance of getting snapshots in time and progress monitoring. So my focus with Mcas is it's one piece of a larger progress monitoring program that we'll have in place for the district. So it is important. It tells us something about our students, but when we start to compare and contrast the Mcas data to our end-of-unit assessments, to our formative assessments, to our mid-years and finals, to our SAT scores and on all of the other Galileo work that we do from a progress monitoring standpoint. When we put all of those pieces of the puzzle together, MCAS is just one piece. So we will hyper-focus on it for a couple weeks. We will use the data to the best of our ability and learn from it, and then kind of put it together in one progress monitoring puzzle. So that's the high-level summary. The leadership team will be doing a lot of work in the next couple of weeks to put together the full version of the Rockport analysis, and then I'll come back to you in a couple of weeks with that.
Okay. Questions, or, seems like they're premature at this point, but.
Yeah, if you have them, that's okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Uh-oh, now we got 3 on the whole. There is, so it's not good for now, but, or it might not be the place now, but it'd be good also to talk about what's the status of our recovery efforts at Rockport, the acceleration academies and things like that. What's happening this year, and then what we might be able to do next year, because recovery is not 2-3 years. It's this whole cohort. It's going to need support their entire time. So I don't know if we want to have a 12-hour meeting when we go over MCAS data and talk about that as well, but it might be good to talk about that down the road too.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I think we've talked already, some of us, about like a next steps component to the work. So I think that's an important piece of what we'll talk about in a couple of weeks. So as we disseminate the data for you all, I think what will be important is to say, where have we grown, where are we still struggling in Rockport, and then what does that mean for our leadership team and our teachers for next steps for kids. And some of that's around acceleration, some of that is around intervention work in the school day, extended programming, and what we can and can't do, and what the research is telling us. Ultimately, there's a big conversation around acceleration versus remediation, and those conversations have to remain at the forefront of our work so that all students are working towards grade level, but getting what they need to scaffold up to, and that's hard work. So we'll keep doing that. But my intent is to finish that presentation with next steps and some intended outcomes for you.
Thank you.
Good. Thanks. The estimated rate of inflation for 2024.
So we have, if you look at the slide deck, we have 3 bullets on here, and I put them in the least controversial order for you tonight.
I was going to go the reverse with the bad news first.
I just figured that 3rd bullet would be a longer conversation.
Okay. Our first one is the auditorium lighting project is moving forward. The vendor is ready to go. Mike Montgomery will be our expert point person for that, as he is all-knowing in the auditorium. And estimated completion will be the end of December. So that's the great news, which I wanted to end on. The state, yeah, I know. Our state reporting season is in full swing. This is where the state is requiring all sorts of data collection based on last year. For example, the end-of-year pupil and financial report, which is all things general ledger, special ed transportation, tuitions, and budgeting. SIMS is being, data is being collected. That is student information. Embedded in that, it would be your enrollment numbers as well, but it does broaden beyond that. EPIMS is your employment data. For example, FTEs of the teachers by job classification, or teachers by subject and grade, the attendance, as well as staffing by groups that they have pre-populated. That's being collected. And finally, SCS, which is scheduling for both students and staff, is being reported. We would be reporting our school course offerings, the number of students in each course, student records, etc. And so it's a lot of work. Allison is our point person along with Amanda. They're doing all the last 3. Myself, along with the help from Town Hall and our Special Ed Student Services Department, will be doing the end-of-year pupil and financial report. And finally, the state has come out with estimates for next year of what they're going to allow private schools to raise their tuitions. And it's a nasty number of 14%. That doesn't mean it will happen. And all our children that are outplaced are not in private schools, but the state will allow them to raise tuition by 14%. So that is a serious consideration with our budget going forward. We do have children in collaboratives, which are a great value. I can't say enough about our collaborative membership. And other public schools, if they have enough children in their district, they may create a program, and we may have 1 or 2 children that could benefit by that program. And instead of sending them to a private school, we could send them to Gloucester or Marblehead, or maybe someone's sending their children to us, our preschool. So those are the great opportunities, but some children do need to go to these private placements, and we just wanted to give you a heads up that the state is authorizing a 14% increase.
So, Mr. Chair, this was a huge topic of conversation Friday. I was at the North Shore Superintendent's Roundtable, and this dominated a good percentage of our meeting. For a lot of reasons. One is we roll into budget season, and we start to try to predict what the increases could and couldn't be. The second reason that June was alluding to is really the cost benefits of the collaborative model, and how all of your superintendents sit on those board of directors and represent the greater district around our local collaboratives. Yet those collaboratives are not going to hit us with a 14% or a double-digit percentage, because the superintendents sit on those boards, right? And we're not going to turn around and assess our communities with that amount of hit to keep those collaboratives. So the real fear around the collaborative model is that if this continues to happen at the state level without the state's recognition of what they're doing, so they're preaching the importance of collaboratives, but then they come out with this kind of a projection, knowing that the private schools are going to be the ones that benefit. They'll hire more staff, they'll expand their programming, they'll build better facilities, whatever that money could be used for. Will the collaboratives be able to keep up over time? And that's the real fear. So there's an active group out of MASs that's working with the legislative committee at MASs to really, engage our leaders around the potential negative impacts that this could have on collaboratives and on budgeting in general, and to not set up competitions between collaboratives and privates, but to make it really clear that if it continues to do this, it could be just as problematic as the funding source for charter schools and tech schools.
So, 2 thoughts. This seems like an excellent conversation to have with our reps when they come in to review cherry sheets, because often they're looking for any input that we have. And this is probably something important to reinforce with them when they're here. And then I guess the other thing I'd be concerned with is it's clear that this sort of calculation as we move into budget season, it's all about the details. What I'm most concerned with is somebody runs away from this broadcast and says, I heard that everybody who's a kid who's been placed in Rockport, the prices are going to go up by 14%. That's not what we're saying. And you do have to work through the mechanics, and that'll come later in the year when we go through the budget process and the budget approval process. But this is really in the form of a heads up that some increases are occurring that are quite startling, and it's something that we're going to have to work through the details of.
Yes, that's definitely correct. And I think the public needs to realize that a placement for a child is not based on cost. It's based on program.
Based on need.
And sometimes those private schools are the only program for that child, and we are willingly obligated, to provide the best possible education for that child. And sometimes that child has to go to, unfortunately for us, great for them on their program, but it costs a significant amount of money. We're also fortunate in Rockport, I suppose you could say, that we have a low number of out-of-district placements, and we have a very wonderful collaborative. For our region, I can't say enough about them. I've visited years ago. I got to go up there, and it's just an amazing place.
So I think we keep this conversation going. I agree with you. I think we reach out to our representatives and senator and keep the conversation happening at the local level and one notch above.
Right.
And to your point, not overreact to the prediction, but do some really good analysis of our budget moving forward. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Do you know, June, historically, how, like, when the last time a rate increase, like, was it above double digits? And has it actually gone into double digits? Like, just historically, what?
I
any
honestly
idea?
don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know off the top of my head. This is a shocking amount.
yeah.
I wish there was a ceiling, to be
Right.
candid. I wish the state had a ceiling on,
And I'm wondering if this almost will help accelerate more collaboration within different districts to take use of best practices and opportunities. You know, if costs become so high, then schools start to look, you know, if the services can be provided, then maybe more collaboration will be taken advantage of, which might turn out to be a benefit.
we've been very fortunate in the past to have students go to other local public schools. And it is quite a significant savings, as well as our preschool being,
And it's also,
Here.
it falls with the path of least restrictive environment too. So they get to go to another public school in an inclusionary model. So there's a lot of benefits to the work we're doing. It's really just a high-level FYI right now. And I think
Right.
we'll move on through the budget process and react accordingly when the time's right. I do want to just say there's a season of reporting. It's one of those, that second bullet item, I think it's really important to understand that we are in the, the public sector is in just reporting mode right now and uploading data. And so Ms. Sanfilippo, Ms. Vanderpool, Ms. Ogier, Ms. Montgomery, they're doing a lot of heavy lifts behind the scenes for us. Lots of heavy lifts. It's not exactly necessarily the most stimulating professional part of their job, so to speak. It's it's the thankless heavy lift that gets done behind the scenes. So I publicly thank that team for the work and for making sure we're in compliance and that everything's turned in the right way and represents us well. So thank you.
Well, and that information feeds into DESE statistics comparing to other districts, to other state reporting. So it's really critical to get it right. And I know occasionally in past years, a piece of information that the state has mangled impacts us in terms of explaining where we are relative to other cities and towns. So thank the both of you and also Allison, who's not here, for doing that, because it's really critical to making our case to the public.
thank you.
What is the most exciting part of your profession?
It's coming to school committee.
you can
That's it, yes,
Right, there it
yes, good
is.
one.
Excellent. All right, so school committee discussion. Are there any walk-on items or concerns? Sort of a open placeholder to see if there's something we want to bring in.
I just had a question about when our reps are scheduled to come. I know they were scheduled, they canceled, rescheduled, maybe a couple of times.
So
Does
so it's not all on them. When I came in, I sort of took the original schedule template and wiped it clean, and Amanda and I are building this
Building it.
as we go, and as I meet with the chair, we continue to do that work. So I would suspect after we get through the Mcas hit in a couple weeks, we'll try to get them in before the holiday season to get some preliminary budget conversations. And I
Yeah.
don't know what the culture's been here, but it'd be great to bring them back again when we're right in the middle of that budget season. So if we can get them to come in twice, maybe as a precursor and then right when we're in the middle of it,
That'd be
that might be
great.
helpful.
Just so we can have in our head sort of our running list of
Yep.
things that we might
Yep.
want to discuss. And
So as soon as we lock that in, we'll make sure we send that out to you guys.
thank you.
Anything else?
Nothing else?
I mean, I just
Yeah.
feel like there's a lot coming up. I feel
Yep.
like it's going to get busy. Really, I mean, you've been very busy. I feel like the school committee meetings are going to more and more information will be
Yep.
happening. It's
Our free ride is
Yeah.
just about over.
It always starts out deceptively slow and then.
Yep.
Right. Is there a need for executive session?
There is not a need.
Aha. All right. So I have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All those in favor? Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.